Crime in the Low Country with Crime and Cast, that's Jim Cast, and the illustrious Elaine Greenwood of Super Woke News. And how you doing, folks?
It was fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. Ready to go. Yep.
Fabulous, my friend.
Good. Hey, folks, we're going to talk about this the Murdaugh saga again. What's happening and what has happened since our last episode?
Well, a lot has happened. He just got an appeal denied by the appeals court. But what we wanted to talk about, picked up from last week, we talked about how Maggie Murdaugh was not lured to Moselle.
Yes. And again, I appreciate it, and you guys expand upon that because I was under the impression, and this is, we all get different news sources and different biases. I was under the impression that their marriage was on rocks and she was lured there and all this stuff. But you guys proved me wrong.
Well, before we do that, why don't you try to just explain the best you can why you think that?
Well, it's Maggie's sister.
Yeah.
Maggie's sister. It sounded like Maggie's sister.
Yeah.
Kind of gave the impression that they weren't in marital bliss. That they were living. That he was living out there at Moselle when she was living. Where was she? In Edstone?
Yeah.
Okay. So that doesn't sound like marital harmony. There were rumors that she had seen a divorce attorney.
Yeah.
Frank, at a time they could never produce the divorce attorney she supposedly saw. In fact, Mark Tinsley, who's no fan of the Murdaughs, actually said that he had questioned every divorce attorney he could think of in the state of South Carolina, and none of them had been approached by Maggie about a divorce. And that in Mark Tinsley's opinion, that was an absolute rumor. But the rumor kind of blew up. And it started with Michael DeWitt in October 2021, publishing a story about that Maggie had sought a divorce. And then that got picked up by People magazine. So People magazine publishes an article that Maggie was lured to the cabin the night she was killed. That's the title of the article. This appeared in People magazine in July of 2022. This People magazine reporter, Steve Helling, published this. His sources, well, who his sources were, they were anonymous. It's believed that his sources were folks like Michael DeWitt, who was simply wrong. But it's such a salacious headline, People magazine ran with it. And when that level of national journalism runs with a story, people tend to believe it. Now, I don't know that Maggie's sister would have believed it. She should have known. She should have had better insight about what was true in the marriage between Alex and Maggie. But honestly, I don't think she did. Jim actually did a really great TikTok show. He did one of his TikTok shows about what Maggie's sister had said. So, Jim, maybe you should expand on this.
Right. So, on the stand, and that's what we have to take when she was sitting on the stand, and Frank, you talked about it. She made it sound like she talked to her sister, Maggie, maybe one or two times, and once in the afternoon, sometime around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, which, if you go and look at Maggie's cell phone records for that day, she actually talked to her sister 13 times on the phone, and she texted her twice.
On the day she was killed?
Correct.
On June 7th?
Yes. Yeah. The historical cell phone data shows she talked to Marian Proctor 13 times and texted her twice. Nothing around the time of 4:30, which is interesting. because that's when Marian said she spoke to her. Now, think about this. Let's go back to Friday, the Friday before she was killed. Okay? What was she doing? She was with her husband, Alan. Now, if she wanted to be at the beach so bad, like everybody says, why would she go to Columbia, South Carolina with Alec to watch the baseball series? USC Gamecocks were in the College World Series, kind of semi-playoff kind of thing. Why? Why? If you didn't like your husband and you're going to get a divorce attorney, the last thing you want to do is be with that person, right?
Right. And spend the weekend in a hotel and at some sporting event. That doesn't make any sense. It's not to me.
A baseball event. Now, I know a lot of women, including my daughters. Baseball is typically not a sport that women really shine to, although it was USC, it was Gamecocks. Maybe Maggie did. I don't know that. However, the other thing that I know, based off of looking at her cell phone data, would you guess, who would you guess? I guess that's my question. Who would you guess, Frank or Elaine, would be the number one person that she called and sent messages to? Would it be her son, Buster, Paul, Marian, Alec? I don't know, maybe even Blanca, supposedly her buddy Blanca. Who do you think would be the number one person? Just a guess. There's no right or wrong answer here. You're just guessing. I mean, there is a right answer here, but.
Well, I would think that you'd be texting the person that you have the most connection to, that you're fondness, that you're fond of. Like, you'd be texting your husband if you had a good and healthy relationship with him, or you'd be texting your close friend the most. So who was the number one person that she texted?
The person that, and I'm looking at the whole month, so I'm looking like from May 7th to June 7th. The number one person she called and sent messages to was her husband, Alex Murdaugh. The number two person was a close second. It was Paul, but that makes sense because Paul was living at home. The number three person was Buster. And between Paul and Buster, this is funny because as a parent, I talk to both of my daughters the same. And first, second, and third between Buster and Paul was like, maybe 10 or 12 calls, something like that. It was pretty close. But Buster lived in Rock Hill, so it also makes sense. You're not going to talk to him as much, maybe because he doesn't live at home. And then the fourth person was Marian Proctor, her sister. So again, I have to ask the audience, think about this from just a person. As a normal human being, if you're going to go get a divorce from your spouse, are you going to go on trips with them? And are they going to be the number one person in your cell phone that you're calling and texting every single day?
I don't think so. Did she have an attorney with the people she was calling and texting? That would be, if I was thinking of a divorce, it seems to me that would be somebody, the law firm that is going to represent me in this divorce from this high-powered attorney would be right up there, number one and number two of people I would be texting or calling before divorce. I think that's what most women would say.
And her cell phone records go back to May 1st, and I show no record of, and I ran these numbers, and there's quite a few different numbers. A lot of them are like advertisements or whatever that come through as text, but I ran these numbers, and there's no law firm on here except for PMPD and Chris Wilson. She talked to Chris Wilson. You remember Chris Wilson was also a witness. She talked to Chris Wilson, but
he was a friend.
Yeah, but mainly
he was responsible for the $750,000 settlement, of which part of should have been deposited in the PMPED trust account.
Correct.
Alec had the right to it, but not the right to it until January of 2022. And so what he had done basically is stolen from himself a few months early. That some of that money that he's alleged to have stolen was money that was his. It was his part of this settlement. And so it was it's certainly a violation of the partnership agreement to have a PMPED, but it certainly is also not against the law for him to have done that.
Right.
So, yeah, but that would be a reason. But what? And didn't Chris and Alec go to, again, they rented a private plane and went to some national championship game of some kind of sport. I don't even know what kind. And so maybe Maggie went along with that. And I think Chris was considered a close family friend, or a close friend for Alex's at a minimum. So that must be what she was calling Chris.
Actually, she was calling Chris because it was near Alex's birthday, which is around, I think, Memorial Day, somewhere around there. And remember the surprise party they had out in Moselle? Here's another thing.
Oh,
So here's another thing for you folks to think about.
I'm not throwing a surprise party for a guy I'm going to divorce. Let's just call this what it is. That's baloney. It's a family-friendly radio show, but no.
That is a good old
surprise.
That is a good old-fashioned fried bologna sandwich. That's what that
I agree. It's a southern fried bologna sandwich. I agree.
Exactly. So, you know, you talk about just these basic things right here, us as humans who have relationships with people. And then you start asking yourself, how do you get lured back to your own home, a home that you live in? Now, for those of you who haven't seen it, it's out on YouTube. If you want to go and look up the Buster Murdaugh interview with Sled, it's available. And they asked him the question, you know, where did your mom live? And he was unequivocal in his response. It was like, oh, well, I mean, she lives in Moselle with my dad, but we also have a beach house. And, you know, she liked living at the beach house when the weather was nice. And but she would also come back to Moselle when we call it the farm, when, you know, she needed to do things here and this and that. But, you know, for the most part, Alec stayed at Moselle because, you know, he worked there. I mean, their beach house is in Edisto, and it's, you know, it's an hour, I think, away, maybe longer from Moselle. So it's not like, you know, you're going to get up and drive an hour and a half every day back and forth. So that's why Alex stayed back.
Well, while we're sitting here talking, I'm just scanning articles published about this. Where did the word lured come from? Because, you know, we see this in media all the time. Media has a script, and they develop a script. And you see radio stations all across this country that we would think are independent or news media outlets, you know, news outlets, broadcast television, and we think they're independent, and they're all using the exact same phraseology. And we've seen this again and again and again, certainly in the last decade or so. So I'm holding in my hand an article. This was published by the Fitz News on April 28th, 2022, where they have in bold headlines that Maggie Murdaugh was lured to Moselle on the night of her murder.
Who is the author of that article?
Your very, very best friends, Will Folks, Mandy Matney, and Liz Farrell. This is why I say Will Folks, Mandy Matney, and Liz Farrell concocted, they innovated on Tinsley Alex Murdaugh. And these kinds of articles, and there are literally hundreds of them. I printed out every article they printed of murders from the murders until right before the trial. So, but this is a typical example of one where they have created this myth that she was lured there, and then People Magazine picks it up. But they're also talking in this article about the high velocity impact spatter. Remember that? That was present on Alex, the shirt he was wearing on June 7th. And this evidence places him physically at the scene at the time of one or both of his family members were shot. They're talking about this impact spatter. There's evidence that contradicts Alex's ironclad alibi on the night of the murders.
Yeah.
None of that was true. None of that was true. But again and again and again, you had outlets like Fitz News leading the charge, setting the narrative, and then it's picked up by things like the New York Post. I'm holding in my hand an article by Dana Kennedy of the New York Post, where she compares Alex Murdaugh to Charles Manson and Ted Bundy. Now, that's going to be about the most reckless journalism there could possibly be. Of all the things you can say about Alex Murdaugh, he is not a serial killer, and he is nothing like Ted Bundy. You know, I had a friend who was killed by Ted Bundy. And to compare Alex Murdaugh to Ted Bundy it's an insult to the memory of the people that Ted Bundy killed. But this hyperbole, this absolute insane, dramatic hyperbole, just permeated news coverage because it sold. Because this kind of stuff sold papers. You know, it put butts in seat. It put, you know, it sold, and it's
right.
It's wrong.
But here's a statement that, you know, think about it in the context that it's written. In that same article, it says she was lured. It says multiple sources have told Fitzsimmons that Maggie Murdaugh was not a fearful person, but she did not like staying at Moselle. Okay, so, but they also have never proven that Maggie just lived at Edisto year round. You know, living by yourself.
Nobody had. It seems like Maggie Murdaugh. I can tell you, at the end of my marriage, certainly for the last 8-10 years of it, I didn't confide in anybody about what was going on within the marriage. It wasn't safe to do that. So originally, I sort of believed the media's narrative about this because I thought if Maggie had reason to leave Alec, it was entirely possible that she played her cards close, that she didn't feel comfortable confiding in anybody. But I think that instead what's true is she didn't say this. She didn't believe it. The reason that she doesn't have her genuine best friend coming forward to say, yeah, we talked every day and I know X, Y, or Z is Maggie's best friend was probably Alec. And then Paul, and then Buster. She loved her family. She loved her husband. That's what the evidence shows. And you know, at your direction, you know, Jim, you and I talked, and I went back and looked at this Blanca Simpson's testimony. She's the housekeeper, and I was stunned because at the time she's testifying, the trial's still ongoing. We don't know how the trial's going to end. We don't know. We don't have the perspective we have now to look back and say, oh my gosh, this woman is not believable in my mind, not even remotely believable. And I think that what we had was a case where everybody wanted, they were aware that their narrative could be monetized on Netflix, on HBO, on CNN. What do we got now? One of the other jurors, everybody out there making a nickel off of this. And you have some people that are clearly not good witnesses, like the housekeeper that took care of Randolph III and Randolph III's wife. She's not somebody that's going to be writing a book. She couldn't say the same thing twice. I don't think she's a liar. I think she's so terrified of being asked a question, she'll give any answer that the person asking the question asks her to give, especially if that person is an authority figure. So she just is a mess, frankly. But Blanca is very different. Blanca is she comes from a military background. She's very used to supporting the official police or military narrative. Her husband is a law enforcement officer in Hampton County. She worked for the Department of Prisons in Hampton County. She's somebody that sees herself as very bright, very capable. I believe she is. Yeah. She knew the value of her testimony. She knew that every whiff or hint or an inference of what she testified to would have monumental effect because she couldn't make clear declarative sentences that such and such was so, but she could insinuate or hint at it. And she was, again and again and again, what I saw in her testimony is she'd been so coached by the prosecution that when she forgot a tidbit, like at one point she's saying, something about some insurance cards that Alec had requested on September 4th, which is after the fake suicide attempt. And she says, well, I don't remember the exact date that he requested this. I don't know, you'd have to look at my cell phone. And then the prosecutor is like angry at her, and she suddenly gives this jolt of, oh wait, no, that's the wrong testimony. What I'm supposed to say is, she goes, oh no, I remember the day was Saturday because the next day was my daughter's birthday. But you could tell the way she said it. She'd been coached to say it. It's a rehearsed testimony. She said it many times, and again and again and again. You could see that where she would correct herself. At one point, she's about to say that she knows. The prosecution asks her, where was Maggie Sunday night, the night before the murders? And she starts to answer the question, and then Harpootlian objects. He stands up and says, if you know. And so that's like oops, I can get caught in this lie if I say what I'm just about to say. So she readjusts, and she says, I don't know. Well, and so Harpootlian's objection interfered with the testimony she was about to give. Okay, and then you actually point out, Jim, that she did know, because she knew that Maggie had woken up that morning at Moselle. She had spent the night at Moselle.
She did.
Because she testifies about the things that Maggie was behind, and she gets to Moselle just after Maggie had left. Maggie had left Moselle because she'd spent the night there. But Blanca's testimony, for whatever reason, is coached, and if you go back and watch it, when she's in conflict, she screws up her mouth. She bites. She almost swallows her lips, especially her lower lip. She's in conflict with what she's saying. She's not comfortable about it. Watch the visual cues of her testimony. When she's talking about benign things, her face is relaxed and she doesn't have that mannerism. But when she's saying things that are contentious and are incredibly provocative, there's a conflict within her that just comes out in her body language. I don't know what the conflict is. I don't know why she's in conflict. If I were a juror sitting there, I would find her incredibly not believable. But more than that, the testimony is irrelevant. We know that now. She didn't see the shirt. She talks about the shirt that he was wearing and tries to create the fantasy that he was wearing a different shirt. I don't believe her testimony at all. I don't believe she could even remember what shirt he walked out the door in. It doesn't make sense that she would remember.
Well, she says she remembers it because when he was walking out the door, she adjusted his collar on his jacket.
Doesn't it seem odd to you? I'm telling you, as a woman, part of my background is, I hate to admit this, but because I wanted to be a student of Dr. Elizabeth Lockton, she's a cognitive psychologist. She's a world-renowned expert on human memory and eyewitness testimony. I had to become a psych major in addition to being a political science major at the University of Washington. So when you're a psych major, you study human mannerisms and why we do what we do. But there are cues. There are times when people who are attracted to somebody else invade their personal space. Like, you're laughing at somebody and you touch the thigh, you touch the inside of their thigh or the upper part of their thigh. That's an invasion of personal space. You touch part of their face. Those gestures that you want to later say were meaningless and harmless and inconsequential with your spouse, nobody see you doing them. No, they're not. They are very specific. When you invade somebody's space, you're attracted to them. Now, I'm not saying she acted on the attraction. I'm not even going to go much deeper than that. But touching his neck to adjust the collar, rather than just simply saying to him, hey, Alex, keep the collar. See, if there's no attraction, that's what you're going to say. If there's some physical attraction or some intimacy, you're going to touch him, invade his space to the point where you are touching him. So I don't think we have any clue who Blanca was, what her relationship actually was. She tried to say she and Maggie were close. But there's this period where they're living at that, Holly Lane address. She has a stroke. So for 4 years, she's not working with the family. And she's trying to say that they were still close in those 4 years. And her evidence of that is if they passed each other at the CVS, Maggie would say, hey, hi, how you doing? But there's no evidence that Maggie said, let's go out to dinner, let's go out to a movie, come over to my house for dinner, or let's go out to coffee. They had no social life that I would identify engaging with a friend. They had what seems to me more of a employer-employee relationship. Maggie was a lovely woman who was caring about the people that worked for her, but it was not a close friendship. And to suggest otherwise when Maggie's dead and can't refute it seemed wrong to me. It seems wrong, completely wrong. And I don't think there's evidence that they were close. I certainly don't think there's evidence from Blanca's testimony that relationship was anything but a close, loving relationship between Maggie and Alec.
Well, here's what I can tell you again. I go back to the cell phone data. So Blanca who says she was, great friends with Maggie. For 1 month, so 30 days from May 7th to June 7th, Maggie, I don't have these correct, but I'm going to be really close. Maggie texted Blanca 13 times in 30 days.
30 days.
And I think 8 or 9 of those texts came on June 7th, the day she died, because they were going back and forth. And what was she doing? What was she texting her about? She was texting her about getting her food. And number 1,
yes,
her paycheck. Number 2, getting food. Can you stop at the grocery store? And here's another one. Can you get...
No, do you need something for Alec? Getting the Capri Sun for Alec.
Yeah.
And getting the right flavor Capri Sun for Alec. They weren't texting about I'm divorced the guy, I want to get away from the guy, anything like that. And then the other was about that Blanca was a good cook. Paul liked her cooking, and would she make this particular dinner for Paul and how to do it?
Yeah. I mean, these are all things that you don't do if you're trying to divorce somebody.
Not at all. And then the text, I actually have this down verbatim. The longest text is where Maggie says to her, thank you, I'm waiting at the doctor. Alec wants me to come home. Come home. If she's coming, if Maggie is saying Alec wants me to come home, and that means to go to Moselle, obviously Maggie considers Moselle home.
Right.
Okay. She says, I have to leave the door open at a stove, but trust Mexicans to shut and offer me. His dad is back in the hospital. The last doctor claims it's not cancer, it's pneumonia. Alec is about to die. I hope he doesn't go down there to sleep. Needs to take care of himself as well.
Okay, so hold on right there. Hold on to that thought. I'm just going to interject here if I will. So that text right there that you just read does not have a whole lot of urgency. What we do know now is that what she didn't know then was that it wasn't pneumonia. He had cancer and he was about to die within days. And so she didn't know that. She just thought, well, he's going into the hospital. He might have pneumonia. It wasn't until later on during the day when they said they were sending Dad to another hospital. So she wanted to stay at Edisto. And why was she at Edisto? Well, what did Marian Proctor and everybody else say that she was doing at Edisto?
Getting the place ready for this
4th of July party. 4th of July party.
Wait a minute. So she's divorcing Alec, but she's agreed to be decorating the house for a big 4th of July party? When was the divorce going to be? Christmas? This doesn't make any sense to me. The reason we're talking about it right now is it was a big part of the prostitution case. If I was a prosecutor, I would say, we got nothing here. This is not proof one way or another of Alec killing Paul and Maggie at all. And you talked about this, you were at the trial. At one point, the court put in raises an objection. The jury is requested to leave, and Alec calls for a mistrial. He says that the prosecution has just set out loud, asked in the form of a question, a statement about this hearsay that Blanca is suggesting that Maggie said that Maggie was concerned about owing $30 million in some lawsuit. But Blanca doesn't even know which lawsuit Maggie would be talking about. And anyway, so what Julian says is, I object to this statement being read, being uttered, the question being asked in front of the jury, because it's hearsay and it's irrelevant at best because it's hearsay about Maggie's state of mind. Maggie didn't kill herself. Maggie didn't commit suicide. Maggie's state of mind is irrelevant to whoever killed her. Totally irrelevant. Right. And it's hearsay. Yeah. And that idiot Newman overrules Hartlett's objection and says, no, it's not hearsay. This is actually what the prosecution at that point says is, we've had lots of hearsay in this trial, as though 2 wrongs or 5 wrongs or 20 wrongs make it right. I mean, that literally is what the prosecution says. We've had lots of hearsay in this trial. But what Newman says, this guy's a boob. He says, well, the defense has offered as a defense that they had a happy marriage. So this irrelevant hearsay is admissible. It's provocative, but it's admissible because it's a different narrative. It counteracts the credible testimony that they had a happy marriage, so I'm allowing it. So I'm thinking, Newman is a boob. Anybody that says this was a good judge is not paying attention. They're just not following his rulings in this case at all. It doesn't make any sense. He was not a good judge. Don't know why, don't even care why. In this case, he stinks. But that's kind of how that goes. In fact, I don't know how we got so far down this rabbit hole, but I do know this. If this was you on trial for your life, you would want the prosecution, we all want the prosecution to bring their A game, to have a prosecution that's credible, so that when we have a jury verdict, we can feel comfortable that we got the right guy and that this person wasn't railroaded by law enforcement that believed a certain narrative, committed to that narrative, and they got everybody in their sphere of influence to agree to that narrative. And then we have people, potential witnesses, who are questioned and approached continually by HBO, Netflix, CNN, Dateline, every media. I mean, Fitz News writes about it all the time, how everybody in the community is selling their story. So that by the time you get to trial, these are coached, if not in the prosecution, they've been coached by media that this part of your story is salacious and you should tell it, and this part of the story has no monetary value, we don't care about it. So they're basically training every witness at trial to say something that they can use to later write a book about, or be interviewed about, or be the center of the trial about. We should have been sequestering witnesses in this trial, and somehow, the media didn't do the cause of justice any favors at all, because it created absolute hysteria that just compounded itself. It spread like this virulent cancer throughout that community, and you have people doing all kinds of things. I'm not saying that Blanca is a bad person at all, but just not critical and also not relevant at all. And if he was such a close friend of Maggie and the family, she had 5 children. Did they play with Alex and Buster? Paul and Buster? Where were they? Did they have relationship with the Murdaugh family and her 5 children? And more than that, though, if she's so close to the family and she's worked in law enforcement, she's been the bilingual interpreter for, it sounds like, the State Department of Natural Resources and the State Department of Prisons and even PMPED were using her as their bilingual translator anytime a Hispanic was involved in any kind of litigation, whether it was criminal or civil or whatever. So she's getting called. One of the reasons she quit this job she had from 2001 to 2007 is she got tired of being called at all hours of the night and day to come and be the translator when somebody got arrested, when an Hispanic person got arrested. So talking about this, just to interpret for them, people that were involved in drugs and involved in crime in the Low Country. And yet she didn't notice that Alec is addicted to opioids. Well, how does he get those opioids? He's not importing them directly himself, and he doesn't have a lab in Moselle where he's creating these. He's buying them. He's involved in some way in drug trafficking in this community. And this very well-connected person, Blanca, who's worked in the prison system, and she's worked, and her husband is actually in law enforcement. She never testified about what she knew about his drug use. That seems kind of odd if she's so close to the family in that way. But here's something else I'd forgotten about. They came up early and we totally forgot. When they lived at what was Holly Lane, it was at the address of the other house. When she first started working for them, they lived at the other house and they went to Moselle on weekends or whatever. That house, somewhere in around 2007 or whatever, they were the victims of arson. But this wasn't just a simple, we're going to let dogs shit in a fire on your porch and it's going to burn the house down. Somebody had broken into their house and sprayed diesel fuel or some kind of accelerant all through the house with the intent to burn that house to the ground. Now, I don't know about you, but I've never had that experience. But it seems to me if somebody wants to do that, they're upset with me. They're motivated. Okay, so how is that you have that act, that arson, and then you have Epstein is attacked. She's savagely raped, and the rapist says, I'm going to kill you. And this happens less than 2 months before Paul and Maggie are killed. And you know that Alex has had this 20-year opioid problem, and yet nobody says, it's entirely possible that Alex opioid use is really in contact with drug cartels that are pissed at him for God only knows what reason, probably every reason. And they are threatening him on an ongoing basis because we know of these two attempts, this arson, this horrific arson, and the brutal, rape of his niece. And yet, Craig wants to say, oh no, there's his fantasy to suggest that anybody other than Alec had a motive to harm a Murdaugh. I mean, it's just, I don't know.
I think you guys convinced me that this was, this marriage being on the rocks thing was all a scam. I think you just have me convinced of that. But there's a couple of things that are really bothering me about the the trial overall. And I don't, people never want to get behind the loser. All right, it's a mainstream media narrative is that Alex was guilty. All right.
Yeah.
I see a whole bunch of people jumping on the bandwagon to prove Alex's guilt.
Right.
Just so that they can be on the winning side of the verdict. And that bothers me. And I don't know how the hell he would ever get a fair trial in this, in this atmosphere, in this media circus. All right. The second thing is, as I keep drilling down the means, motive, and opportunity.
Yeah.
Right? It really drives me crazy. Now, explain to me why Alex would kill his wife and one of his sons when she held all the deeds to all his properties.
It makes no sense whatsoever. But not only that, the other part of the theory is he's afraid of a hearing on June 10th. No attorney, if you've ever sued an attorney, or if you've ever been a public attorney being sued, I know, everyone knows, they drag their feet about anything and everything. Try to depose an attorney. It's almost a waste of time. So the fact that at this hearing, a judge might have ordered Alex to produce some financial records, it would not have to that. He would be used to that. It's part of what he deals with day in and day out in his chosen profession. Likes engaging in this kind of sort of adversarial relationship. He's not afraid at all. He's going to pull every trick out of his hat to avoid having to produce that. But it's even the bigger truth. Alex is the one that said to Tinsley months earlier, 10 months earlier, he said, I'm broke. You're not going to get $30 million from me. I don't want to repeat that number because that number is fantasy. Tinsley wasn't actually asking for $30 million, and supposedly he got 25, but he got it from Parker. So I think he would have got $30 million from Alex is the one that said to Tinsley, I'm broke. So Tinsley said that I am seeking financial records because Tinsley didn't believe it. So I think that Alex was about post were records that he was broke. I think Alex has struggled with to satisfy.
Hey, Elaine, your phone's breaking up really bad. I maybe try to get a better spot in the house. But to add on to that, while you're trying to find a better spot in the house, if Alec was so worried about this June 10th hearing with your buddy Tinsley, wouldn't he be on Monday, June 7th, wouldn't he be calling his attorney? Because what he did when he went to PMPD that day was he started putting together his financial information. He got together his 401k stuff. He went to Jeannie Seconder for that. He was trying to get that stuff together, but guess who he did not call at all on June 7th? He didn't call his attorney that was representing him in the boat case that was suing him, he and Paul. Not once did he call his attorney. So, you know, how worried was he about this? You're right. He wasn't. Like,
not at all. Not at all. And I think that we don't understand this basic fundamental thing. And I was talking on the phone just telling you, I could tell I'm having a problem hearing you guys. I didn't know it was my phone or your phones or whatever. But attorneys like this kind of stuff. You and I may be a little bit put off by hearing me. We have to improve because we're not so familiar with the process. It's not part of what we do in our normal life, and it makes us anxious and uneasy. Attorneys chose this profession. They love this profession. It's what they do. The same way a house painter picks up a brush and paints a house. And not in any way something was of concern to Alec. I think that Alec was more concerned about getting Moselle ready for the hunting party the coming weekend. Talking to Paul about fixing what, you know, they had that guy, Stevie, whatever his name was, who had screwed up a food plot they put out or something like that. So they had to go back and replan a food wrong or something like that. But those things seem to be of more concern. And frankly, I think Alec was extremely concerned about getting a new supply of opioid drugs. And I think that that's what we're seeing when he's in the car with David Owen. He's, forgive me, but he's sweating like a pig. I think he's somebody that he has been withdrawing from opioids over the weekend. He's been trying to withdraw in the last couple of weeks, and it wasn't working, and he was sick. You know, when they were at the games, Maggie had actually gone down to the game, and he'd stayed behind in the hotel because he was so nauseated from trying to withdraw from the drug, and that gives you diarrhea and cramping and all kinds of physical discomfort. And I think it was then that he probably, if you look at his text messages or phone calls, he probably called his drug supplier and said, hey, I need to place an order. I can't do this. I've got to get back on my drugs. And I think that's what he had in his pocket when he's talking with David Owen. And I think what we're seeing then, his mannerisms, is somebody that has just renewed his powerful addiction to opioids, and we're seeing the physical manifestations of that in his sweating and his nervousness.
Yeah. So
and I really that makes him a drug addict, and that's not good. I'm not saying this is a plus for Alec, but it does not make somebody that fits his body and his son.
So the guy you're talking about is Claude C.B. Rowe. He was the groundskeeper for the farm, and you know, to take this further about being lured, and they say Paul was lured back, like he called Paul. He wanted Paul and Maggie to come there. Why didn't he call Buster? Well, because Buster was not the guy that he was going to call to fix stuff out on the property. Buster had a job. He was living in Rock Hill. So who's he going to call? He's going to call Paul. Paul's home for the summer. He's working at his brother's place. This is what Paul does. He takes care of the property. And so, but the important thing about that is that when Alec called Paul to tell him to come home and fix the sunflower field where they're going to go dove hunting, he was going to go. He had a dove hunt planned for Saturday, the following Saturday. And he wanted Paul to come home and fix things for the hunt on Saturday. Now, again, if you're going to kill somebody, are you planning to have such things like a dove hunt on a Saturday after they're murdered? Or why even have your son come home? I mean, maybe none of this makes sense, but it's certainly here in the Fitz News article, and I'm reading it right now. The last sentence in it says, in other words, Maggie was lured, and that's in quotes, to what would be the site of her murder, according to multiple sources with knowledge of the situation. You know, I would love to know what these multiple sources are and what knowledge they had, because right now I'm looking.
Because you know what to do. Will folks will back away from this and defer blame. He does that at least on a sidestep where it's somebody else's fault that got it wrong. And he loves to say things like, "Oh, we all get it wrong once in a while." Well, those once in a while, it was article after article after article after article. We could do 100 shows on these articles that are outrageous and they're biased, and there's always some unnamed source. We know some of the unnamed sources were law enforcement that were totally not credible. They shouldn't have been leaked to the Will folks to start with, and they leaked information that wasn't true. The high velocity spatter that supposedly linked Alex to the murders of his son and his wife never materialized. And that wasn't true. It was an enormous lie that captured the entire world and spun around the globe before anybody could put a dot, at the time, that's how explosive it was. It was never retracted. It was never corrected. That's why I do not buy into it was just, we got a few things wrong.
Yeah.
You benefited financially from an enormously false, horrible narrative. So, I don't know, needs motive and opportunity. There's no motive at all. I'm not saying there wasn't no motive. And I don't know, I think that the prosecution utterly saying, if we started with two prosecutors and they took a look at the evidence that they have that's credible, I don't think they would even want a second trial. I don't think they had circumstantial evidence in the first trial, the benefit of the tsunami of baloney. I don't see how they're going to survive a second trial at all.
Yeah. Well, I would take it one step further, that if SLED wanted to get an indictment today, knowing what we know today to be true, they wouldn't get it. By the way, if you go to crimeandcask.com, I have an article up there about Alex Murdaugh's t-shirt and a mystery surrounding it. They call it, "Is It a Cover-Up?" Because on August 9th, 2021, SLED knew. The forensics team knew at that time there was no human blood on Alex's t-shirt that was found on his body the night of the murders. And when the police came, what was on there was, I forget what they call it, but it's chicken blood. And that chicken blood was from taking the chicken out of Bubba, taking the guinea chicken, whatever, out of Bubba's mouth. So that proves that he was wearing that shirt when he last saw them, which means he didn't shoot his son. That alone right there is reasonable doubt. And why Jim and Dick never came up on that, I don't know, but that's reasonable doubt right there. Because you cannot shoot anything that point blank range and not have anything on you. I mean, there was zero on you.
Yeah, you cannot be that close to the shots and not have that blowback.
No.
It's exculpatory. It's absolutely exculpatory. Law enforcement knew it.
It's Brady material.
Well, Jim, my phone is really not picking this up well, and I hope that the audience has a better quality than what I've got right now, because that's not fair to the audience.
So
sorry about that.
That t-shirt that you're talking about, it didn't have any blood on it until David Owen went out to Oklahoma to meet Tom Bevel, and then all of a sudden it had all this blood on it. I have actually.
We could do a show on that. Just Tom Bevel was not present at the trial because he was completely discredited before, probably by a couple of Dick Arprulian's pre-trial motions. You know what I didn't understand, though, is as a strategy, why didn't Dick wait to the trial? Why didn't Dick let them put Bevel on the stand and then discredit this Dick's entire case?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a great question for Jim Griffin.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to get him on the show anytime soon, but
Well,
do you think
I never understood their strategy.
Do you think that they would get, knowing what we know today, and I think you mentioned this, do you think that they would be able to get an indictment?
No.
No.
All right, here's a better question. Being that SLED said there's no danger to the community. That leads me to believe that they wanted to build up a case against Alex from the get-go without at the same within hours of the notice.
Yeah, the defense made a big deal about that, and honestly, excuse me, honestly, the person who put that out, I mean, who knows? I think maybe they radioed and said, "Is everything clear there?" Yeah, everything's clear. Okay, but there's no danger to the community. And because there's no way you could go to a crime scene like that and say that was the guy that did it. We got the guy like within hours. It's impossible, and nor would they do it. Not to mention the fact David Owen didn't show up until I think well after midnight. So.
I always thought it was an odd statement. It doesn't make any sense. It wasn't it shouldn't have been reassuring to the community. It wasn't. It became, they didn't indict Alex for months and months and months and months and months. So, no, I always thought it was just an odd statement, but I'm not sure. Did Tommy Crosby, who put that out? They had the SLED information officer, I can't think of his name, but wasn't it Tommy Crosby or Cosby? It was the original SLED producer. I remember talking to him, but they would put things like that out, and then there was no follow-up to it. It's kind of like, why did Duffy Stone recuse himself on August 8th? We don't really know. It was also a non-event at trial. There's so many things at trial that I guess the defense must have decided they're trivial or irrelevant, and probably they are. On the other hand, there was a lot of trivial and irrelevant stuff that was allowed in, so I never understood any part of the strategy of that at all. But yeah, it does look like they honed it in on Alex from the beginning. I mean, that's the only logical inference from that statement. But then they sort of deny that they did that.
They can deny all they want, but in the time that they made that announcement, the day after the murder, through the time that Alex was indicted, they were assembling the case against Alex.
Yeah, and only against Alex. And then when Creighton Waters says it's absolutely not credible at all to think that anybody connected with the boat crash would have had anything to do with Paul and Maggie's death, and yet what did they do immediately? They went and got DNA samples from everybody with the boat crash. So obviously it wasn't so entirely out of the question to speculate about that, because they did that. They either are admitting that they wasted everybody's time getting DNA samples from Mallory's father and his current wife and every one of those boat brats is in the boat and Renee and whatever, or they had credible reason. There was reason early on to say these people could be involved. I think it's entirely credible that somebody that believes the narrative they were pushing about how this beautiful, angelic Mallory was killed by this evil Paul Murdaugh, who is remorseless and entitled and whatever. I mean, they just so vilified Paul even before his murder that they could have easily incited some idiot, kind of like the shooter that's on the roofs that takes a shot at
or friends of the boat victims, huh? Maybe friends.
Here's something.
Absolutely. Just a minute, Frank. Renee works in a prison. She's a nurse in a prison. Who does she deal with on a day in and day out basis? Criminals. Maybe she inspired one of them, whether she meant to or not. Maybe she had to treat one of these patients, and he felt sympathy or gratitude for her treatment. That she relieved his pain and suffering as a nurse, and he did her a favor by killing this mother and this son that Renee hates. Hatred, it could be the inspiration for all kinds of evil. Because they didn't know they didn't have hatred. Yes, they did.
Yeah.
And show me the articles that were favorable to Paul. Go back and look in the community. I actually pulled one out that was from right after the boat crash, where they say that they found Mallory. She's not an angel in this article. She's a young woman who died, who drowned. This is the way the article portrays her. And that all the kids were drunk. And McCullough, this is what they say. Joe McCullough is representing two of the kids. And Joe McCullough says the reason they didn't do field sobriety tests on any of the kids is because it would have made it difficult to get a conviction if they had done those field sobriety tests, because it would have made it obvious that all the kids were grossly intoxicated.
Well, you're making my point. You're making my point. Now, let's if there's a bank robbery,
yeah,
and there's a fatality in the bank. All right, the driver of the car.
Yes.
The driver of the car stands for the same crime as the person that pulled the trigger in the bank.
right.
Yes.
All right. Now, if you follow that line of thought, okay, was everybody in that boat that allowed that boat to be piloted by the unknown person who is, this
we don't know
who was running the boat, right? Was everybody on that boat culpable for that death?
Yes. This is what got lost in all of this. Paul would have had a defense at trial. His defense could have been him simply testifying, Connor was driving the boat. Connor and Miley wanted me to take the blame because they figured my dad would give up. And they didn't have a dad that's a powerful attorney, so they convinced me to take the blame. And I've been silent about it. And my mother won't allow me to be silent about it anymore because Stone Cold Sober, I realize I have to go to jail for a long time, and I'm not taking the fall for these guys. We don't know what his defense would have been, but he said not guilty. So he intended to go to trial and assert and prove that he was not guilty. And what media did is they said that they tried to make us believe that he had no defense, that he's just some rich, slick kid who hired these hotshot attorneys, Carpulina and Jim Griffin, to get him off of, what would that be, voting under the influence to cause bodily harm or death. Whatever the charge exactly was, I'm not sure. But that's one way to look at it. That's the way Mark Tinsley or Eric Bland would look at it. But a defense attorney would say, we don't know who was driving the boat. We know all the kids were intoxicated. All the kids chose not to wear life jackets. All the kids, they were off the boat. They were told by their family members, you're too drunk to drive the boat. You're too drunk to pilot this boat. They insisted on getting back on the boat. They motor over to Buford. They get off the boat again. They're safe. They're on firm ground. They could call mommy. They could call an Uber. They could just fall asleep on the grass and be alive in the morning. No, they drank some more, drank some more. Actually, I think the other kids were drinking beer. Anyway, they drank some more, and all of them drunk, grossly intoxicated, get back on the boat and let the drunkest among them drive the boat. So are they all complicit? Yes. And the insurance said that this was the predictable consequences, that death was the predictable consequence of those behaviors, those choices that those kids made.
All right, so I own a bar, and I serve somebody who's noticeably intoxicated, and they get in the car, and they felony DWI. All right, they kill somebody. All right.
Yes.
The bar owner, because he served a visibly intoxicated person, all right,
Okay.
is a party to the suit.
Yes.
That being said, how come the folks that threw the party
They were
and served their kids?
They were sued. No, the people.
Were sued?
Yeah. Yes, the people at the Oyster Roast were sued and they settled out, but they did not, supposedly, according to testimony, they did not serve the kids any alcohol. The kids bought the alcohol, kept it on the boat, and were drinking the 5 hours of the Oyster Roast by themselves. Luther's Rare and Well Done, that sold 2 drinks each, did get sued and supposedly settled. We don't know what they settled for, but Tinsley immediately understood that the deep pockets were by Proctor and Alex Murdaugh. So he went after them. And actually, Randolph III was sued too for owning the property on, what was that, Chesney Creek or whatever, however that's pronounced. where the kids started drinking. They actually started drinking stone cold sober. They were drunk. Stone cold sober. They bought alcohol with this fake ID that they had purchased. Some of them had purchased the ID from a company in China. The registered ID is solely to fool the point of purchase scanners. So in some states, you can't sue at all. If you engage in that conduct to get the fake ID, and then you go out and kill somebody, you can't sue the people that sold you the alcohol.
Paul was the one.
You can't.
Paul was the one that had Buster's ID, and then he bought alcohol there. But the other kids brought their own alcohol, because if you look at the picture of the cooler after the crash, there was all kinds of different alcohol in it that Paul did not buy. So these kids brought their own alcohol.
Yes. Yeah. Well, they admit it. They actually testified to that. They admit that under oath in depositions. They admit that. That's why, oh boo-hoo, they all get to get $100,000 from Parker or the Murdaugh estate. That is so destructive to any legitimate concern that society has. When we let these people abuse our laws to enrich themselves for conduct they willfully engaged in. And then Mallory would not be dead, I don't believe, if she put on a life jacket. I'm sorry, but I grew up in Seattle. It's a big boating town. We never were allowed to get on a boat, get anywhere near a boat without wearing a life jacket. We also weren't allowed to drink on a boat and other things like that. So when you have no accountability for your own conduct at all, you get this kind of scenario. But that fed into this evil Alex Murdaugh empire narrative and vilifying Paul as though he was the only one on the boat that drank. That isn't true. As though somehow he the body mass of Anthony Cook. Anthony could have said at any time, Paul, sit down. I'm twice as big as you are. I'm driving the boat. Anthony was the most sober on the boat. He could have stood up and said, I'm not letting you or Connor drive the boat. I'll drive the boat. He didn't. He made a choice not to. And then he turns around and sues Paul's estate and sues Mr. Parker. I think it's wrong. I think it's disgusting what they did. But that narrative got spun by HBO because it built into that evil Alex Murdaugh empire thing, especially when you have this beautiful, by the time of the murder trial, Mallory is deified. She's an angel. She's absolutely Saint Mallory. And that narrative, it made Paul and Maggie's life worthless. It made it that the community wasn't really grieving for Paul or Maggie. You couldn't even, by the time of the trial, I don't think you could find people saying a positive word about what wonderful. Paul was a wonderful young man. He was a complex little guy. Can you imagine your dad is addicted to opioids and you know it and you care and you want to stop it? I mean, that little guy is carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. He's got a bunch of friends that are sycophants that only want to be around him because they think he's got all the money, he's got all the toys, he's got the best parties, and he's got the alcohol. And that's what they like Paul for. So he's got to be a little kid he's carrying a lot of weight on his shoulders. And I think that had he lived to stand trial, he would have had a spectacular, powerful defense. Killing him silenced that and absolutely financially benefited Mark Tinsley, Renee Beach, and those boat rats, each and every one of them. That gives them a motive to silence Paul and Maggie.
Now, we started out at the top of this hour trying to convince me that Maggie and
Paul
and Alex's marriage was not contentious on the rocks, and that wasn't a motive for the murder. And you both have successfully convinced me of that. Okay? Can you wrap that up in a bow so we can conclude this episode?
Right. Well, so you have to follow the evidence and you have to follow the facts. News stories are what they are. They're stories. Facts are facts. They're two different things. Don't confuse the two. Don't mingle the two. And the evidence proves beyond a reasonable doubt that Blanca was not friends with Maggie, number one. Number two, her sister talked about being lured, where she told her to go. Well, I mean, his dad was sick, and maybe sicker than Maggie thought. And that's on Marian for saying that. But it's proven that Maggie spent time with Alec at baseball games. She planned birthday parties for him. She wanted the housekeeper to get him special drinks. She was planning a 4th of July party for Alec. They had plans. Alec was going to go do a hunting trip on Moselle the weekend after the murders. He wanted Paul to come help clean up the sunflowers so it didn't look like crap out there. And so Paul was coming back to do that too. It all just kind of came to a head. And, and you also look at what Maggie did. She drove in the morning from Moselle and she drove to Edisto. She had people inside her house working. And she felt apprehensive, clearly, leaving the door open for what she called the Mexicans. And so I think she felt a little apprehensive about leaving her house. She wanted to get it done. And Alec wanted her to come back to visit with Dad. And I don't think she wanted to. But the evidence proves that she loved her husband. She wanted to do things for him. She did special things for him, like a surprise birthday party, like getting him special drinks, like making plans for the 4th of July. These are all things that you do not do if you're trying to divorce someone. And you're not going to call them and be the number one person in your phone that you call and text all the time. This is evidence, people. Now, you could read People magazine and go, well, why would People magazine write it? I don't know, because Fitz News wrote it. Well, then you get to, why did Fitz News write it? Because people talked. Now, people didn't know what we know, what Maggie's phone number was, all these things that she was planning and doing and saying and things that were planned. These people didn't know that. They just were coming off the cuff. And I think one of the people was some nail person that never got called to trial because, Maggie's going to just unload on some stranger that she doesn't know. No, same way she didn't tell Blanca that they're going to owe $30 million and they didn't have it, because that wasn't true either. So a lot of these people are just saying these hyperbole things to just maybe sound big or be involved. But at the end of the day, the facts prove that Maggie was in love with her husband. She wanted to do things with her family. And Alec was working. He didn't really care, although he probably cared, but he wasn't afraid of Mark Tinsley. That's evidence based off of him not calling his attorney. He was doing what he was asked, getting the financial information together. Everything was going as planned. I still go with my book, Defending Alex Murdaugh, Not Guilty of Reasonable Doubt, that Paul was killed, targeted and killed because of that boat crash, because of Mallory, and because Paul was probably going to call someone to provide evidence on a unsolved death down in the Low Country. And I think they were just done with Paul. They had no more use for Paul. None. Unfortunately, Maggie got in the way.
Well, I appreciate your explanation because, I was in somewhat of a void, being a relationship failure. And it appears that you have a lot more insight into the whole relationship thing. Elaine, do you have anything to add?
For two reasons. Because I think my phone is not performing the way I'd like, and I don't want to put your audience through having suffered through bad sound quality. But I agree with everything that Jim Cask is saying, and I think that we put out absolutely a credible theory of a crime where we can look to people that have voted to kill Paul and Maggie. To kill Paul silencing, and frankly, to kill Maggie because Maggie could. At one point, she actually could testify to what she got me to call Paul's defense, my ban, or whatever. But Maggie is a threat to anybody that wanted to push the narrative that Paul alone was driving the boat and Paul alone was responsible for those accidents. For sure. Maggie is a little longer bear who would have defended her son.
Well, I appreciate your comments. You have me convinced, and that's only one more piece of the puzzle of the whole Murdaugh thing that we're embarking on bringing clarification to. And Jim Cask, I appreciate your participation. Elaine, I can't thank you enough. Guys, we got about an hour in the can here, and I appreciate everything, and it really brought a whole bunch of clarity to that awful rumor that kind of muddied the waters of the trial itself.
Yeah.
And let me say goodbye, and I thank you very much. And this is Frank on Target with True Crime in the Low Country with Jim Kask of Kask Crime and Kask and Elaine Greenwood of Super Woke News. And we're on WVSF Red Brick Patriot Radio 97.7 FM. Thank you, folks. Have a good day. All right, guys.